Hello guys, so now I'm going to go ahead and talk about angles formed by the parallel lines and transversals. I briefly went into it on the previous video introducing the angles, but here's the part that I want you to know. Alright, so we have our two black lines here that are parallel. Usually in geometry, one, if they're not visually, like, oh, they're parallel, sometimes what they'll do is they'll put little arrows on them to indicate whether the lines are parallel or not. If they have the same number of arrows, then we can say that they're parallel. For example, if I had two lines, these look parallel, right? So you would expect something like that, right? Indicating that they're parallel. This one had two, and I wanted to say that they're parallel. The bottom one should have two. If I had two lines here, right, this one might just have one, whereas this one might have two, indicating that they're not parallel. Aside from that, I mean, just go by what you see. It should be very obvious when the lines are parallel or not. So these two lines are parallel. The line that goes through my parallel lines, that's called my transversal. And I already talked in the previous video how in general we end up with the following angles. So in this scenario, we were just assuming that if this one was 100, then that had to be 80. These two are vertical angles, they're supplementary, right? And because the lines are parallel, those angles just repeat right below. I'm going to be going back and forth to this one right here to explain the relationship between the alternate interior, alternate exterior, corresponding, and consecutive angles. And today we're going to be talking about angle pairs. These are vertical. I guess you could say that that is an angle pair, but we already talked about it, so I'm not going to mention it anymore. Right, so some angle pairs here formed by my transversal going through my parallel lines. So here it's saying that it's an alternate interior. So here's how basically you want to break this up. Where your two parallel lines are, in between them, we call that section the interior section. Outside is obviously the exterior section. So this is exterior, and this is exterior. Now they're asking us to find, well, not to find, but here I'm just, showing you guys around, and I'm gonna go ahead and show you the alternate interior angles. There's actually two sets. So obviously, because it's interior, they're gonna have to be inside, and they're gonna have to alternate. When you alternate, you're here and then you're there, So one way to think of it is this 4, and it's not gonna be next to it, okay, but it's gonna be over here, the 6. So the 4 and the 6 are good examples of alternate interior angles. Another good example, and the only other example, would be the 5 and the 3. Again, they alternate, meaning that they're on different sides of the transversal, and they're still inside the two parallel lines. So that right there, that's your alternate interior. And if we look at our original picture, notice 4 and 6, pretty much these right here. And notice how they are the same. These two were the same. And so we can make this conclusion that anytime you have alternate interior angles, they will be congruent. Alternate interior angles are congruent. Now we have alternate exterior angles. And again, I switched the picture around on purpose, but it's the same thing. Wherever your parallel lines are, in between, that is interior. outside is exterior. Now remember how I said that alternate just means it's going to be on opposite sides of the transversal. This black line is my transversal. So let's say I picked this 9. It has to be on the other side of the transversal, but not next to it, so 13. 9 and 13 are a good example of alternate exterior angles, just like 16 and 12 are as well. Again, if we look at the original picture, and I just were to flip it like this, again, we're looking at the top left and the bottom right. 80, 80. They are the same, and these are the same. So once again, alternate, if you guys could just remember that alternate exterior angles are congruent. Very important you guys keep that in mind. Now we're going to look at corresponding angles. So it's a little bit weird to describe in words, but corresponding angles, they're going to be on the same side of the transversal. Okay, so they're going to be on the same side of the transversal. So for example, let's say I was looking at the 1, right? I cannot match it with anything on the other side because it has to be on the same side of the transversal. And the way you want to think of it is, one of them is going to be inside, one of the angles is going to be interior, and one of them is going to be exterior. So again, they have to be on the same side of the transversal. One is inside, and the other is outside. Again, inside, interior, outside, exterior. So if I find my interior here, okay, this is my interior. This one right here is outside, so I need to get the one inside. One more little thing I should add, they are not next to each other. Not next to each other. By the way, there is a word for this. This next to each other, the word is just adjacent. Adjacent means next to. Alright, so one's out, one's in, but not next to it, it has to be the 5. So angles 1 and 5 are corresponding angles. Let's do another one. Angle 7 with angle 3 are also corresponding. And there's a whole bunch more on this one. You could say that 2 goes with the 6 and so forth. Again, you're going to notice that they're on the same side. One's in, one's out, and they're not next to each other. Now we compare it to our numbers over here. Look at that 1 and 5, right? (100, 100), they're congruent. Let's look at that 3 and 7. (100, 100), they're congruent. Look at that 2 and 6. (80, 80), they're congruent. Corresponding angles are also congruent. Corresponding angles are also congruent. Very important. So far, these 3 we've talked about, they have that same relationship in which that they are congruent. Where congruent means, as you saw, that they're just the same. Next up, we have consecutive angles, aka they're also known as same side angles. There's same side interior, there's same side exterior. There's consecutive interior, there's consecutive exterior. They mean the same thing. As the name indicates, they have to be on the same side. And the difference between these and corresponding is they're both gonna be interior or exterior. For example, this one, I want it same side, and then it's on the outside, so I have to pick the other one that's on the outside. So angles 1 and 8, these are consecutive exterior because they're on the outside. 3 and 6, they're on the same side, they're both inside, they must be interior, consecutive interior. Look at that 1 and 8 when we compare it, 180. Oh, these are different. 3 and 6, 180. They're still different. But there is a relationship. 180 together gives me 180. 180 together gives me 180. Consecutive angles are the only one of these four pairs that are not congruent, but instead are supplementary. And remember that supplementary means that they add up to 180. As a quick recap, we saw how alternate interior angles, alternate exterior angles, and the corresponding angles were congruent. And this is the symbol for congruence, an equal sign with a little squiggly on top. Okay, that means congruent, which when we're dealing with actual numbers, it just means that they are the same. But the word is congruent. Okay, the word is congruent. Whereas consecutive angles, these were supplementary. They're not the same, they're not congruent, they are supplementary, which means that they add up to 180 degrees. The reason this is important, guys, that you more importantly know the relationships more than anything is because there will be times when you'll encounter algebra problems. Okay, sometimes they'll give it to you in words, sometimes they'll give you a picture. Picture would be the ideal situation. Here's what I mean. Let's say you were given some nice parallel lines, and I'll keep it simple. Let's just say that this was a 4x, and this over here on this side was just x, just random. Well, first you gotta look at them. We see these right here. They're both on the outside. They're both on the same side. Oh, these are consecutive angles. And since they're consecutive, I know that they're supplementary, and therefore 4x plus x must be equal to 180. And that's how you'll be able to solve for x. Other times, you might get things something like this. Or let's say this was 2x plus 10, and this was 3x, right? When you look at them, oh, these are alternate exterior, and I know that alternate exterior angles are congruent, and therefore 3x must be equal to 2x plus 10, and that's how you would end up solving for x, and ultimately if you had to plug it back in to find the missing angles. But yeah, again, the big thing here to remember, guys, is know that with the exception of consecutive, there are congruent, okay? And this one's supplementary. So one little strategy that I would suggest is just remember which one is supplementary. If you remember the one that adds up to 180, then the other ones are equal to each other. But yeah, that's it on this one, guys. Any questions, again, feel free just to reach out.